Hello, my name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a therapist specializing in emotional healing and relationship counseling. Life has taught me many lessons, but perhaps the most profound one was about forgiveness. Today, I want to share a story that is deeply personal, one that changed the course of my life and redefined the meaning of family for me. I grew up in a small town in Oregon with my younger brother, Daniel. He was 3 years younger than me, and for most of our childhood, we were inseparable. Our parents worked long hours, so we relied on each other for company, for play, and for support. Daniel was my shadow, following me everywhere, always looking up to me with admiration in his bright green eyes. But as we grew older, things changed. Life happened. Mistakes were made. Hurtful words were exchanged. And before I knew it, the bond we once had was broken. We drifted apart until one day, we were nothing more than distant memories in each other's lives. I was 22 when I last saw Daniel. It was at our parents' house during Thanksgiving dinner. What was supposed to be a warm family gathering turned into an ugly argument that neither of us could take back. Harsh words were spoken, words that cut deep, and when he stormed out of the house that night, I never imagined it would be years before I'd see him again. For the longest time, I was convinced that I was right and that he was wrong. I held on to my anger, my resentment, and my pride. I told myself that if he wanted to fix things, he would reach out, but he never did, and neither did I. Years passed. I built my career, worked hard, and dedicated myself to helping others heal. Ironically, while I guided my clients through their emotional wounds, I neglected my own. Deep down, there was always a lingering emptiness, an ache in my heart that I refused to acknowledge. Then, one day, everything changed. It was a quiet afternoon when I received a phone call from an unknown number. Something in me hesitated before answering, but when I finally did, my world stood still. "Emily, it's me, Daniel." His voice was different, deeper, heavier, as if carrying the weight of the years we had lost. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say. So many emotions rushed through me: relief, regret, sadness, and hope, all tangled together. I I know it's been a long time, he continued hesitantly. I don't even know if you want to hear from me, but— I do, I interrupted, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused, and I could hear him exhale, as if he had been holding his breath. "Can we meet?" he asked. I didn't have to think twice. "Yes." And just like that, after 7 years of silence, we were about to face each other again. We decided to meet at a small coffee shop near the park where we used to play as kids. I arrived early, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the door. And then he walked in. Daniel looked different. Taller, leaner, with lines on his face that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, the same green eyes that had once followed me everywhere, held something I had never seen before: pain. For a few seconds, we just stood there, studying each other, before an awkward smile broke across his face. "Hey, Em." "Hey, Danny," I replied, using the nickname I hadn't spoken in years. He let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. Wow, I can't believe we're actually here. Me neither, I admitted. We sat down, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with unspoken words, with memories that hovered between us like ghosts. Finally, he cleared his throat. I. I'm sorry, Emily, for everything, for leaving that night, for not calling, for. I shook my head, cutting him off. No, Daniel. I'm sorry too. I was stubborn. I let my pride get in the way. I should have reached out, but I was too caught up in my own anger. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. I guess we both made mistakes. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Yeah, we did. Silence settled again, but this time it was different, softer. I missed you, he finally said, his voice breaking slightly. Tears welled up in my eyes. I missed you too. We talked for hours that day, about everything and nothing, about where life had taken us, about the things we had lost, about the things we had learned. And somewhere in that conversation, amidst the laughter and the tears, something shifted. The years of resentment melted away, replaced by something we had forgotten. Love. That day, I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about accepting it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward. It's about letting go of the pain, not because the other person deserves it, but because we do. Rebuilding our relationship wasn't easy. It took time. There were still wounds to heal, still scars that ached. But we took it one step at a time, one conversation at a time, until one day, the distance between us no longer existed. Reconnecting with Daniel was like rediscovering a part of myself that had been missing for years. That coffee shop meeting was only the beginning. After years of silence, we had a lot to rebuild: trust, understanding, and the deep bond we once shared. At first, it was awkward. Even though we had spent our entire childhood together, it felt like we were strangers in some ways. We had both changed, grown into different versions of ourselves. But the more we talked, the more I realized that the core of who we were, the siblings who used to run through the park, build forts in the living room, and sneak into the kitchen late at night for snacks, was still there. We started meeting regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks in the park. We took small steps toward each other, carefully navigating through the remnants of our past. One day, as we sat on a park bench, watching the sunset, Daniel let out a deep sigh. You know, I used to think about calling you so many times, he admitted, staring ahead. But every time, I convinced myself that you wouldn't want to hear from me. I turned to him, my heart aching at his words. I felt the same way. I kept waiting for you to reach out, but deep down, I was just scared. Scared that maybe too much time had passed, that maybe we had become too different. He looked at me then, his green eyes filled with something raw and real. I don't ever want to lose you again, Em. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I smiled through them. You won't. We've wasted enough time already. From that moment, we made a silent promise to never let anger and pride come between us again. One evening, a few weeks after our first meeting, Daniel invited me to his apartment for dinner. I had never seen where he lived, and I realized just how much of his life I had missed. When I arrived, I was surprised by how cozy and well kept his place was. It had little pieces of him everywhere: his love for books, his passion for photography, and even a few childhood pictures of us on a small shelf. Seeing those old photos made my chest tighten. "You kept these?" I asked, picking up a small frame with a picture of us as kids, arms around each other, grinning wildly at the camera. Daniel chuckled, scratching the back of his head. "Yay, I couldn't bring myself to get rid of them. Even when we weren't talking, I still thought about you all the time." I swallowed the lump in my throat and set the frame down gently. "Me too." Over dinner, we talked about everything: the past, the present, and even the future. I learned that Daniel had been through his own struggles. After our fallout, he had moved to a different city for a few years, trying to build a life for himself. He had battled loneliness, financial struggles, and even a few failed relationships. "I guess I was running," he admitted, poking at his food. "Running from the past, from the guilt, from everything." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "But you're here now, and that's what matters." He smiled, and for the first time in years, I saw the little brother I had always loved. One of the hardest things we had to do was face our parents together. They had been heartbroken over our estrangement, but never forced us to reconcile. Now, after so many years, we decided it was time to reunite as a family. We planned a small dinner at our parents' house. When we arrived, Mom burst into tears the moment she saw us together. She hugged us tightly, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I prayed for this day for so long." Dad, who had always been a man of few words, simply pulled us both into a strong embrace. As we sat around the dinner table, laughter and warmth filled the room. For the first time in years, it felt like home again. That night, as Daniel and I stood outside saying our goodbyes, he looked up at the sky and said, "It feels like we've been given a second chance." I nodded, smiling. "And this time, we won't waste it." Life moved forward. But this time, it felt different. Lighter, warmer, and filled with a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Rebuilding my relationship with Daniel wasn't just about reconnecting with my brother. It was about rediscovering the love that had always been there, buried beneath years of silence and pride. As weeks turned into months, we became part of each other's daily lives again. We'd check in on each other, grab lunch whenever we could, and spend Sunday afternoons at our parents' house, just like we used to when we were kids. It wasn't perfect. Some wounds still needed time to fully heal. But we had both made the choice to move forward, and that was enough. One evening, as I was leaving work, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Daniel, got time to meet? There's something I want to tell you." Curious and slightly concerned, I replied right away. Me. "Of course. Everything okay?" Daniel. "Yeah, just want to talk. Meet me at our old park?" The mention of "our old park" brought a smile to my face. It was the same park where we used to play as kids, the same place where we had met again after all those years apart. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, sitting on the swing set with his hands in his pockets, deep in thought. He looked up as I approached, a small but nervous smile playing on his lips. "Hey," I greeted him, sitting on the swing next to him. "You okay?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck, a habit he had since childhood whenever he was nervous. Yeah, I need to talk to you about something important. I waited patiently as he gathered his thoughts. Do you remember how I told you I spent a few years struggling after I left home? He asked, glancing at me. I nodded. Yeah. Well, there was someone who helped me through it. Her name is Lily. The way he said her name, soft and careful, made me pay attention. She was there for me when I had no one, he continued. She saw me at my worst, and somehow she still believed in me. Emily, I'm in love with her, and I'm going to ask her to marry me. I blinked, momentarily stunned, but then warmth spread through me. Daniel, that's amazing! I reached out and hugged him tightly. I'm so happy for you. He chuckled, hugging me back. I wanted you to be the first to know. I know we lost a lot of years, but you're still my family, and I want you to meet her. I pulled back and smiled. I'd love to. A week later, I met Lily. She was kind, down to earth, and had this calming presence that instantly made me understand why Daniel loved her. She welcomed me with open arms, and from the way she talked about him, I could tell that she had been his anchor through the hardest times. Seeing my brother so happy, so in love, filled me with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. At their engagement party, I watched as Daniel stood in front of family and friends, thanking everyone for their support. Then he looked directly at me. There's someone I need to thank more than anyone, he said. My sister, Emily. She's the reason I believe in second chances, in the power of forgiveness. She's my best friend, and I wouldn't be here today without her. Tears welled up in my eyes as he raised his glass. To family, to love, and to never letting pride keep us apart again. As everyone cheered, I met his gaze and smiled, knowing that we had come full circle. Forgiveness had given us back what we thought we had lost forever. And for that, I would always be grateful.